WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively getting the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back out on the road, presented by our friends at the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Goodwill Industries. Had a great conversation with John Baylog. I did a lot of spring cleaning this weekend. We've rounded up all the old wedding gifts from 20 years ago that we haven't used, and teapots and stuff, and lightly used things for our friends at Goodwill. So I'll be getting the Goodwill truck out here, and I'll be taking the Maryland Lottery scratch-offs. I got fresh Betty Boops. We're going to have those at G&A Coney Island Hot Dog in White Marsh on Friday, the 22nd. We'll be there from 2 until 5. And then we're doing a special Wednesday version next week at Conrad's in Perry Hall. Football, they're not going to play it for a couple months. And usually right around now, Luke, I'm putting the old trip to Munich on sale for the Ravens to see Tom Brady. Not happening right now. It's all draft. It's all pieces of free agency and some news here and again, and various lawsuits and people taking command down there in the nation's capital. We had a great conversation with John Feinstein. Don and I did last week on Baltimore Positive about that. But I don't know. You don't ever sleep on the Ravens, right? Like at any moment, something could happen that could force you to send the WNST text, courtesy of our friends at Coons Baltimore Ford, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it. I mean, the NFL offseason, other than that early July, where maybe the only thing that happens at that point is off-season problems in the NFL, legal issues, whatever it might be, which, you never know. But right now, you're counting down to draft night. It's very, very much around the corner at this point. And, but the other big thing going on this week is off-season workout program starts. Our early Monday morning, I saw the Ravens tweeted out a video of Tyus Bowser walking into the facility, and good to see him walking first and foremost after the torn Achilles in the season finale back in January. But we're at that point where it's.
By the way, I know Tyus Bowser. He's one of the guys I know on the team, and I like him. So
yeah,
I felt awful for him. I had good conversations about stretching and working out with Tyus Bowser back when I used to be a real reporter, and when I used to work hard in the locker room, Lou, because we all know I don't work anymore.
He's certainly someone who would stretch and do different things of that nature. But good to see him walking. I mean, an Achilles at that late in the season, at the very end of the season, you always wonder when he's going to come back. Not that he won't come back, but is that going to be for training camp? Is that going to be for the start of the season? I mean, those are question marks when you're talking about that kind of timeline. So not that him walking 20 feet from his car to the entrance of the building in Owings Mills tells us a whole lot, but it's good to see nonetheless and see guys back in the building. We'll hear from some players. We'll hear from Steve Saunders, the strength and conditioning coach, which I'm guessing the Ravens aren't going to broadcast their plans beyond the few little tidbits that John Harbaugh offered at the owners' meetings a few weeks back. But very clearly coming off of a historic injury-plagued kind of season, John Harbaugh vowed after the season that they'd leave no stone unturned trying to revamp things, trying to improve things. And as much as injuries luck goes into that, there's certainly best practices that you're always evolving and trying to revamp and try to improve. So not that we're necessarily going to get those details, but it will be a topic of conversation, I'm sure, this week as we do hear from a handful of players. But it's always fun. I know John Harbaugh and the coaching staff certainly like seeing guys back in the building beginning this week. Not that they're doing any practicing or anything of that nature right now. It's strength and conditioning at this point in time. But it's the next step. We always talk about the checklist. To your point, you never really have dead periods in the off season. You might have a week or two here or there that's a little bit slower, but this is one of those checkpoints. You get to the start of the off season program, OTAs will start, of course the draft, don't let me leave that out. But rookie camp, then OTAs, then mandatory mini camp, and before you know it, they're on the backfields on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday mornings in Owings Mills with training camp, and not two-a-days anymore. We know that, but the dog days of camp will be here before you know it. But getting these guys back in the building after most of them, other than guys that have been rehabbing injuries, which we know have been a lot of them, but good to see guys back in the building, and coaching staff always curious to see exactly how these guys look, who shows up, knowing the voluntary nature of it all, but just fun, knowing that guys are going to be doing something football related, at least in Owings Mills this week and moving forward now.
Luke Jones, so we'll be covering all things Ravens. There'll be some press conferences. There'll also be some late night baseball. Look, I wore my El Guapo shirt not because I have any allegiance to the Oakland A's here this week, being up late with you with baseball, but football being on the brain and baseball now starting. And for a guy like you that's diving into MLB Network and trying to figure out what's going on with John Means and trying to figure out when Rutschman's coming up and like all of that with baseball, football simmers a little bit. And the fact that they haven't released the schedule, I don't know that it's curious to me. And I think the math is a lot weirder with 17 weeks and the different off times and the obligations they now have to the Amazons and YouTubes and whatever deals they have and stretching all of this out. They have these international games now, 6 of them this year on the back end of the plague. I think some of it may be logistical to soothe the feelings of all the teams that have to go and play internationally who all hate it, right? Like Harbaugh went nuts in a scrum in Florida when I mentioned they might have to play in Munich or in London. But I've done the math on this, Luke. They're playing 6 international games, 1 in Germany, 1 in Mexico, 4 in London, right? So that's 12 teams. That's 12 teams every year. There's 32 teams. You got a 1 in every 3 years shot, unless you're the Jaguars, of being a part of something like this. And that's not even to say that they're not going to play a game in Sydney, Australia at some point or wherever else they're going to wind up taking their game. I don't think they're ready for France yet or some other places that would have stadia, Italy, not like that, but they are going to do this. And everybody gets their feelings hurt when the knock on the door comes and it's the Turk and they say, you're on Hard Knocks. And they have so much drama, right? Whether it's Jimmy Haslam trying to sell this kid to Cleveland, whether it's Steve Bisciotti fighting it out now with Lamar Jackson and me, by the way, in regard to guaranteed contracts and who's getting him and who's not, and keeping these guys out of jail in the offseason and out of trouble in the offseason and getting ready for a draft and all of this other stuff. But the schedule was the thing the fans were like, hey, let's make plans. What are we doing? Them putting this off is sort of brilliant. But it's not if the Ravens are playing in Munich on September 18th. You know what I mean? And they might be because somebody's going to be. And, I'm a fan who's excited for the schedule every single year. So I do feel a little like grasping for something that's not there right now. But they'll turn the lights on next week in Vegas and it'll be larger than life. And it'll just be one big Vince McMahon 20 after the hour interview that schedules the next thing they do, which is, your schedule's coming out. Tom Brady might be coming to town.
Yeah, and I mean, you just said it, waiting. I think that's the big key. And you just mentioned Tom Brady. And look, I'm not going to sit here and try to say that I can remember when exactly the schedule was released, say 20 years ago, but it was certainly earlier than May, which is where it was last year. And when you look at some of these scenarios, especially now, Tom Brady retiring for 40 days and 40 nights and then returning.
How about the drama with him in Miami?
Sure. Of course. But, you asked me about the schedule, though, and you look at that, you look at the trades and just big time player movement, specifically with quarterbacks. The longer you wait, the more clarity that you gain based on who's going to be playing where, what teams are going to be good, what teams that were good last year aren't going to be as good now. There's so much of that. So you get a chance to wait. To your point, they already have the draft. The draft is going to own late April, regardless of baseball, NBA playoffs, Stanley Cup playoffs, all of that. And they'll all have their piece. But the draft,
10 days lead to deals, speculation about move-ups, move-downs. The draft has already started in that way. This week the draft starts because at any moment, there might be a deal that moves, not the Ravens, but plenty of other teams looking for quarterbacks, right?
Oh, quarterbacks. Drama with Deebo Samuel and with the 49ers and guys wanting contracts. Yeah, sure. You just go down the list. There's so much of that going on. And even if nothing happens with any of those individuals, there's still the chatter of it. And, not that day 2 and day 3 of the draft, not as much, but that Thursday night, first round, my goodness. I mean, everything else will take a back seat, and sports talk radio will be all about that. And the talking heads on ESPN and all the other networks be talking about the draft. So it's huge. So if you're from an NFL perspective, why wouldn't you try to bump back the schedule into early or mid-May? And look, I haven't heard officially when it's going to come out. They always make the announcement for when the announcement's going to be, which I always find that kind of funny. But you're right. For anyone that's trying to plan from a logistics standpoint, if you are talking about a trip to Munich or another trip to London, which I'm with you, if it's not this year, the Ravens will be going somewhere very soon. If it's not this year, it feels like it'll have to be next year because it's been since 2017.
Yeah, it feels like a minute ago, but it's been 6 minutes ago.
Right. It's been a while. Right. And keep in mind, of course, with the pandemic, I mean, there were no abroad games in 2020. Last year it was only a couple. So, you have had a couple years of disruption in that regard, but it's very clear that's not going away. And John Harbaugh can bristle about it all he wants. The powers that be in the NFL, including his boss, Steve Bisciotti, at the end of the day, are going to say, there's nothing we can do about that. The wheel is going to continue to roll in that regard. And you'll have to get on board because we're going. So, I mean, that's just the way it works. And John deep down knows that as well. He knows it's why he's compensated so well as an NFL head coach. But it will be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, I mean, you look at how everything's done. Everything's an event, right? I mean, it's silly when you really think about it. Beyond talking about the scenario of playing in Europe or playing in Mexico, something where to go on a road trip, it would take some extra effort, a couple extra days off from work. If you're a fan talking about going on the road for a game like that. But for the most part, I mean, Nestor, we know the 17 games the Ravens are going to play. We're just waiting on the order, right? I mean that, and where it's going to be in the case of one specific game potentially. But I mean, the NFL's just, they own it. They make an event. They are so effective, regardless of all their other flaws and transgressions and things that just make you say, oh, that's gross. And the league is guilty of plenty of that. They're really good at making something as mundane as a schedule release into a big deal, right? I mean, again, we know all 17 opponents the Ravens are going to have. We know that. We've known that since the day the season ended. But it's still a big deal. And you and I are talking about it, and we're talking about why it doesn't come out as early as it used to, for example. And that speaks to just the hold that the NFL has on the American sports imagination. I mean, as much as we all love different things, I mean, I love baseball. I like the NBA a lot. Again, after not really liking the NBA for a long period of time, getting back into it. And, people love soccer. People love Stanley Cup. I mean, go down the list. Most people love the NFL, though. And even the people that claim not to like it still seem to pay attention to it very closely. And it's king. We've talked about that. So the draft will be the next big thing. And then the schedule, which isn't, let's be clear, it's not as lucrative as the draft, but it's a big deal. And especially if you're someone who wants to go on the road, and especially after the pandemic the last couple of years, someone who's looking to travel and go see the Ravens somewhere, whether it's, as close as Pittsburgh or to go to Germany or the UK.
Some games this year, we play
the
Jets. I'm wearing Jets green, right? Gang green. We play the Giants. I mean, these are, very, very doable, quick run. Tickets will be available.
Yeah.
Kind of. Weather might be nice. Bus trip might be nice. Put some ice down some beers and go old school. Do one trip old school. Throw it together. Yeah. I miss that stuff, Luke. That fan stuff. You know what I mean? Now that I'm a real media member.
Yeah, no question. I mean, and you look at some of the trips. I mean, again, we don't know if it's going to be at that city, or a couple of these cases, it could be abroad. It could be in Europe, but Tampa, New Orleans. We haven't even mentioned that. I mean, you got some pretty cool destination cities. And to your point, even if you're someone that's on a little more of a budget, you can go see the Ravens. You can drive, you can take a bus. Those. Some of our bus trips of the past, as you mentioned. So it's fun, and we always, and believe me, when I'm talking about how mundane the schedule release is, I'm just saying that because we know the opponents. It's not as though it's a surprise. Which teams out of division are the Ravens going to be playing? We know that, but it does give you clarity. And for football fans, certainly for media members, but for football fans by and large, get a chance to plan out your fall a little bit. Every Sunday you're going to be watching the Ravens somewhere, whether it's from home or downtown or going on the road, but now you get to plan that a little bit. And to your point, we don't know for sure if the Ravens are going to have a game in the UK or in Munich, but if they don't this year, it's going to be coming very soon. That feels obvious at this point, 5 years later. You hope it goes way better than the last time, by the way, because, as much as we talked about the knee and all that, they got their butts kicked that day at Wembley. And as much fun as we had on that trip, the football game itself was not very fun.
When I think of that trip, I think of the delicious muffins they served me in the press box there. They were the most delicious muffins I've ever had. So if I have to go back to Wembley, I'm just going for the muffins in the press box, honestly.
I honestly, and I'm going to surprise you with this because you know me, I'm very basic when it comes to food. I'll think of that great Indian meal that we had, that Indian restaurant we went to,
Hans
which
Kenzie
was very tasty.
That often as well.
So
I do.
As I said, as we said at the time, 5 years ago, everything about that trip was great until they kicked off that Sunday. I mean, because the game itself was a nightmare, but fun trip. And again, whether it's this year, whether it's next year, certainly Ravens going to be going somewhere because it feels, you just do the math, go down the list of teams. Although, I guess this year will be the first time Green Bay will be in on this. I think they were the last team that had to play an international game, and they'll be playing one this year. So it took that long, I guess, to get through the 32 teams. So, again, it'll be coming, whether it's this year, the next, it's got to be coming here over the next couple of years.
Well, I'll be circling
that's certain.
The game with the defending AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals. I don't think I've ever said that. That's kind of weird to just say that. So
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you got to give the Bengals credit. I mean, as much as we know the history as far as getting back to a Super Bowl, especially when you lose, we know that's you look at that history. I mean, even dates back to the 70s. I mean, it's a short list of teams that have lost the Super Bowl and then make it back the following year. So the law of averages and probability and history is working against them, but they've had a nice offseason. You look at what they did to fortify their offensive line. And look, I think the Ravens are going to be back in the sense that they can't possibly be as injured 2 years in a row. I think you'll see a regression to the mean in that regard. So I fully expect the Ravens to be right there with them. But hey, the Bengals are the champs until they're not anymore, and you have to give them credit in that way for the division and for the conference. So everyone's going to be gunning for them, which means they're going to get everyone's best. We've talked about that narrative in the past. So, but they're going to be challenging. Say what you want about Cleveland and the mess, the ownership and the circumstances. Deshaun Watson, if he's on the field and available to them, changes the complexion of that football team. So Pittsburgh, we'll see what happens with their quarterback situation. I mean, I still think they're clearly lacking in that regard. The rest of the roster pretty good though. So you have a division that it's not going to be a cakewalk. It never is. I mean, even the years we think it's going to be a cakewalk. I guess 2019 was the lone exception here recently, but lots going on. And certainly as we get closer to, with the draft and then the schedule coming out, we'll have much more context in terms of knowing when exactly the Ravens are going to play all these games, but certainly looking forward to it. That's for sure.
Well, DeCosta will keep you busy this week. I'm sure there'll be a text coming somewhere along the line. The Orioles are out in the middle of the night playing in Oaklandia. Luke Jones can be found at Baltimore Luke. If you subscribe to our WNST text service, you do get those brought to you by Coons Baltimore 4. Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, and I spent some time with Dennis talking some football and some baseball here this week, as well as we sort of stumble up onto the draft next week. Sort of a weird week here now that baseball has started, but they're playing in the middle of the night, and there's no schedule to grasp onto. But I promise we're going to point those buses north up the Jersey Turnpike for something fun. I am Nestor. He is Luke. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.